This is Trudy Haynes, and this is the Trudy Haynes Show, of course, and we're very privileged to be able to talk to two of our outstanding council persons, so that I don't get the genders mixed up. But I'm very happy to welcome Blondell Reynolds Brown, councilwoman, who's been in the chair for your fourth term.
Yes.
And Councilman Bill Green, who is a second termer.
Yes.
And both of you have been very concerned about the school crisis, and this is what we're here to do today to talk about.
Sure.
And maybe you can shed some light on where we stand with the school crisis, what council plans to do about it. I know it's on the board, and how the two of you differ in your approaches to how to settle that. So we'll, ladies first, if you don't mind, sir.
No, please.
Well, I would think it important to put the position I often take in context. I come to City Council as a teacher by training. I started my career in the classroom and have a up close and personal experience about what it means to be in a classroom, what it means to be a good teacher, what it means to have books and art and music and athletics and guidance counselors and nurses, etc. However, I came into the classroom 30 years ago. And indeed, now we are at a very different place when it comes to the financial distress of our schools. So that needs to be considered. Secondly, I think it's important to remember is that Philadelphia is not a lone soldier in this, in the area of our schools being financially distressed. There are a number of schools across Pennsylvania. And the more I talk with Senator Vincent Hughes, a friend of mine, he often talks about that there are school districts across the country that are trying to figure out how we responsibly fund our public schools.
You're referring to State Senator.
State Senator Vincent Hughes, correct. And so in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia is not alone. Harrisburg school district is financially distressed. York
All of Harrisburg is financially
distressed. Oh, there would be those who would agree with you.
Yeah.
York school district, and of course Chester Upland, which is less than 30 minutes from here. So that as a second factor. And then lastly, when we know that it is a constitutional, the state constitution requires, whether or not we honor that requirement is a different thing, but is the responsibility of the state as dictated by the Constitution that our public schools be funded. So with those three backdrops, I take the position often that I take.
And that is?
That we should figure out with the state, based on shared sacrifice, we meaning the mayor's office on the second floor, members of city council, coupled with the leadership in our state legislature and the governor, figure out how we fund Philadelphia's public schools.
All right, we'll go back to the mayor and we'll go back to the state support. But it is the right, you're saying it's in the Constitution that they should figure out ways to support the schools.
They have a constitutional responsibility first.
Okay.
Yes.
And then we go to something. Oh, Councilman, where do you object?
Well, obviously, nothing. First of all, the councilwoman and I are very good friends.
Let the record show.
And we can agree on issues without being disagreeable, and this is certainly one of those circumstances. And frankly, our end goal is the same, which is a free, quality public education available to every student in the city of Philadelphia who would like to avail themselves, or whose parents would like them to avail themselves of one. And so the question is how we get to that end goal. I think a little bit of context in terms of how we got where we are today is important, and that is we recently, until 3 years ago, had a school district budget of well over $3 billion. I can't remember, it was 3.1 or $3.2 billion. Part of that for 3 years was about $300 or $400 million a year from the federal government in stimulus funding, stimulus grants that went to school districts across the country. Many school districts used that for infrastructure, for teacher training, for things that were sustainable once the money was gone.
Yes.
The Philadelphia School District spent that money on things that were not sustainable if we didn't continue to get funding from the federal government at that level going forward.
Where did we spend it, for instance?
We spent it, what did we spend it on?
Yeah, you said we didn't do that.
So we spent it on programs, summer programs. We spent it on things like Parent University. We spent it on things that really were nice things to have, but not things that were necessary for the classroom to make sure our children performed well on tests, understood the subjects they were studying. So we spent it on things that were nice-to-haves additions instead of in the classroom, or instead of upgrading school facilities or dealing with security issues or things that could be sustainable and help the district over time.
Now, both of you, excuse me, both of you in council, and you saw that happening.
Yes, and I will say that Councilman Bill Green was the one council member who during those hearings was relentless in reminding us that how we spent that money would be important because they would not be around at some designated hour.
Which is now.
He enforced or just reminded us in a way that I hear like a bell, we need to spend those dollars on sustainable programming. And
so
that did not happen.
We did not do that. As a consequence, when the federal funding dried up, it was a huge bump in the school district because they'd taken, for example, their administrative staff from around 80 or 90 million the year before our last superintendent to over 125 million. Now they had to cut all of that back to, it's now, I don't remember what it is, 433 positions, but it's below the 80 or 90 million it was then. So they spent it on things that didn't help people in the classroom. That's just one example of it. So the question is, okay, that's how we got here. The pain was real once that money went away because we created things that we then had to close down, and that hurt students and parents.
And on top of that, we had a national crisis.
And then we elected a governor who and a Republican General Assembly that decided to take away another $300 million a year in funding that Governor Reynolds had committed to urban and rural school districts across the state based on a study that was funded by the General Assembly, which was, we called the costing out study, which indicated that Philadelphia was underfunded by $1 billion in terms of what it needed to spend on.
Even though we pay the most taxes.
We do pay the most taxes in the state, but it was underfunded by $1 billion, and overall education statewide was underfunded by, I think, $3 billion. And Governor Blondell had committed to try to get us there and was on the path to do that prior to his leaving office. So now what do? Well, the fundamental problem is we have a school district, in my view, that is too large to succeed. It's got 150,000 students in it, and 50,000 students are in charter schools, which are public schools. Charter schools are public schools.
Yes, just one question, both of you. Are charter schools bleeding the public schools?
Charter schools give parents choices, and I have to admit that I had to arrive and evolve into being a supporter of charter schools. I was strongly against them 10 years ago. But in looking at the way in which many of our students were not performing in our public schools as we know them, and in an effort to give parents really what they deserve, and that is options in choosing where they want their young people to go, I have evolved to believing that charter schools absolutely serve a purpose.
Question, are they bleeding the public schools?
Well, the answer to the question is yes and no. As with most things, it's complicated. Until the first budget under Governor Corbett, the Philadelphia School District received $115 million a year in charter school reimbursement. And that really was, I think was about $3,500 per student that went to a charter school. When we were getting that funding, which was a deal made with a then Republican governor, and a lot of members of the Philadelphia delegation who have some culpability in the fact that we're not getting the funding we used to get from the state, that the deals they made 10 years ago they can't enforce and uphold. That is a problem. But so with that reimbursement gone, it is very difficult for the school district to lose a lot of students to charter schools. However, if we went to a New Orleans style model where, say, 70–80% of all students ended up in charter schools, it would actually cost the district far less money because they would need much less administration, much less oversight, much less supervision, because each charter school is essentially its own little school district under state law. And so the problem is the school district will not admit that it's lost the competition. There is public school choice in Philadelphia. You can send your child to a neighborhood public school where they're going to be, if they don't get into a magnet school or some other school, where they're going to be at 35% or less grade level in reading and math through the entire time they're in their neighborhood elementary school. So if you're not lucky enough to get your child into a Masterman, into a magnet school, or you're not in a catchment area like Sadie, you're not in a catchment area like Sadie Alexander, you will choose a charter school for your child. The problem is the school district has completely stopped the growth of charter schools, which is, in my view, illegal under state law as it is. And so you've got this dichotomy where you've got the public schools, the public school district, stopping the growth of charter schools, which are the only public school choice option available for parents who want to get their child into a better school. There's over 30,000 students on waiting lists for charter schools that exist. If we created new charter schools, which many people are trying to do, there'd be even bigger waiting lists. So what the district is doing is sort of, they seem to just, if you're familiar with the old Dutch fable, they've got their fingers in the dike and the water's, it's backed up. And the problem is when they allow charter school expansion the way state law requires, they are going to have to shrink rapidly in order to have their costs go down as the charter school costs go up for the district. That is what they've failed to do historically, cut their costs quickly enough to pay for the students going to charter schools. So they keep their entire infrastructure plus they're paying for charter schools instead of managing the district correctly and admitting they've lost the public school choice competition, recognizing that they're going to have 50,000 fewer students in the public school system in the next 7 years when they admit charter schools, and right-sizing the district to appropriately allow for that and to pay for charter schools. Parents want charter schools for their children when they have a failing neighborhood public school.
Do we have any good public schools?
Well, of course we do.
Absolutely we do.
Sadie Alexander, Masterman, Meredith.
Powell, many would argue Powell and West Philadelphia.
Are they're better schools in teaching, but are they also supported financially? Because they get the same cuts that the other schools get.
I'll comment on the capping that the school district has made with regards to charter schools. And it is terribly unfortunate that the school district in many ways has pulled the plug on operations across the board to get a handle on the operations, if you will, and one of the victims of that management decision is the capping of charter schools. So it's terribly unfortunate that parents, their choices are now even more limited. Now, the answer to yes, there are public schools that are operating in a way that that is commendable. What we know is that where you have parents actively engaged in the academic lives of their young people and actively serving on the parent-teacher associations and showing up at school activities and doing the fundraising, like it or not, those schools actually do better. There are fewer children in the principal's office and lots of additional dollars separate from what they're getting from central office to do some of the innovative arts, athletic kinds of things that we want our young people to do. So in those schools it's interesting because those schools where they're doing well academically, they're also getting an infusion of dollars from parents who are actively engaged in other ways as well. The answer to the question is that this is short, and that's unacceptable, that you have a short list of public schools that are doing well. And so it is in that spirit and because of that unfortunate reality where I actually am leaning towards embracing this position that Councilman Green has taken, that we really do need to figure out how we can give parents better choices for their kids.
All right, question.
We're going to find something to argue about for you, don't worry.
Yeah, but when do you have to vote on the council participation financially?
The deadline date is June 30th.
Right.
June 30th. So between now and then, you have to decide.
You have to figure it out.
Where the money's coming from.
Yes, we
Are
do.
you close?
Well, let's review the options first. How about that?
Sure. The mayor has put $28 million on the table from additional from additional
Uncollected.
The cigarette?
No, this is from a more aggressive tax collection. The district asked for $60 million from us. The mayor's put $28 million on the table. There is $25 million on the city side from extra collection that is not in the 5-year plan, that hasn't been funded, just like the $28 million he found on the school district side. So we can come close to the $60 million that the school district actually requested just through taking the city side of collections and applying that to the school district. There's other things on the table. Councilwoman Sanchez has a bill that would raise $32 million, or the rest of the 60 from changing the use and occupancy rates to create a city-side use and occupancy tax. There's lots of, the mayor is proposing liquor by the drink tax and a tobacco tax. $2, which we'll see what happens in, in Harrisburg. Really, that depends upon our state legislative delegation. I think Senator Williams was here in City Hall and said that they were a slam dunk in Harrisburg. We'll see if he can actually deliver on that promise. I mean, the problem here is people like Tony Williams and others in our delegation helped a Republican governor take over our school district, and now we can't do anything about it locally because they control it, and they're not being held culpable for that.
That control? It
lasts forever until the school board itself declares it, the School Reform Commission itself declares itself financially solvent.
And they won't do that right in this crisis.
They certainly won't.
But between now and June 30th, we really do have to figure out how this heavy lift is going to happen. And depending upon who you talk to, there's a sentiment, informal as it may be, that the mayor will be unsuccessful in convincing, persuading, enticing the governor and the state legislature simply to give us the authorization to collect those taxes. So if we cannot get the authorization to collect what we know as sin taxes, it will not happen.
Why haven't we lynched him?
Forgive me?
I mean, what can we do?
Well, sitting with the leadership of both houses has value, sitting with the leadership both on the Republican and the Democratic side, but that has to be led by the mayor and city council,
where we be willing.
He's willing, sure, but here's the fundamental problem. The city, as it always does, will step up again this year and provide some funding, like we did last year and the year before. We always do it with the promise that our state delegation gives us, that you put up money, we'll get some money from the state. We haven't gotten any money from the state in 2 years. I'm going to make a prediction. What this governor and others really want. Frankly, I'm undecided about whether or not it's a good choice at this point. Is they would provide the help we needed probably if the school district would declare bankruptcy, focus on paying its bonds, and what they want. So what they want, the purpose of that bankruptcy would be to void the PFT contract and all other contracts, and allow the bankruptcy court essentially to set the rules about how people are paid, and yes, exactly. So that is probably a very poor choice, doomsday scenario for the district. But you can't help but think that that's where they're driving it, right? Since they won't put up money. We're $300 million short this year.
Yes.
The Philly Schools Partnership is an organization raising $100 million to give to public schools and private schools to help students who are needy. Their executive director, Mark Gleason, was testified before City Council several weeks ago and said that that just putting in the $60 million from the city would be a poor investment by Philadelphia taxpayers because the district's asking for $300. And 60 doesn't get us there. It's not a sustainable system. And we really need the SRC to come back to us with how they're going to spend the money they're actually going to get, not just their wish list. And once they provide that, which would be more like a $2.36 billion budget instead of a $2.6 billion budget, $240 million difference. Once they provide that, then we can start to have a real discussion about what's real and what has to happen. Right now, it's just all doomsday scenario, schools with no special algebra, special advanced courses, with no extra languages, etc., with no arts and music, no sports,
no counselors,
no nurses. And the problem is $60 million. It doesn't buy that back.
It still rakes at the bone. And that's another place where Councilman Green and I would agree. There are many, many more members on City Council who believe we deserve to know, once we commit to X number of dollars, exactly what you're going to do with those dollars. In other words, the days of simply raising the money for the school district is no longer acceptable. Once we send you the contribution from the city, tell us how you're going to spend those dollars, because we've seen already years where you committed to spend it one way, and then we discover later on, following year, that it wasn't spent that way at all.
And even after all of that, you still have to get ready for next year. That's
right. And there's no, I haven't seen a credible plan for a sustainable school district the entire time I've been in council, because they've either been overspending based on so that it wasn't sustainable once those funds were gone, or underspending so it's not sustainable and can't properly educate our children. And we need to provide a free, quality public education for children whose parents want them to have one in this city if we are ever going to grow and create jobs and be an environment that people want to live in with their children. Right now we have people moving out when they're 5 that can afford to. And we have people who have many fewer choices being relegated to neighborhood public schools where the likelihood is when they go into high school, they will not graduate from high school. And we are essentially dooming tens of thousands of students to a subpar quality of life for the rest of their lives because of what we're doing with our school district. And we have to stop that. And tinkering at the edges, doing marginal and incremental change won't do it. We have to do something transformative like they did in New Orleans and other cities. We can't just slightly change what's happening in the district.
And that's where my anguish lies, because tinkering at the edges helps a few. And so should we sacrifice those few and abolish or allow the system to go bankrupt to then help the greater good? I'm of the view that let's do what we can with the few pennies that we have. And Councilman Green is absolutely right. If we don't capture young people and getting them to know how to read by 3rd grade, it is true. The facts are that by 6th grade, if they don't know how to read, then by 9th grade, they're gone. And though we've seen some small incremental increases in Philadelphia's graduation rate, it's still unacceptable when still less than 45% of our young people are not graduating. And so this year, I think, we're going to have to reckon with the scenario that Councilman Green has just articulated. Do we again tinkle at the tweak at the edges and Philadelphia honor up by offering its 60? Or do we allow what really would be a doomsday scenario to prevail and end up with a system where we're forced to start all over?
That would mean closing schools?
Frankly, in my view, it would mean charterizing the worst 20 or 30% of each school in the district, allowing charter schools with catchment areas so that you don't have citywide lotteries, but you have people to be able to walk to neighborhood charter schools. With respect to what we can do in the district, I would allow pilots, which is a situation where parents and teachers, if over 50% of each, want to take over a school and run it themselves as essentially a different kind of charter. They would be allowed to do that, take control of their children's destiny. That has been a successful program in Boston and other cities. I think we ought to try pilots here. I would like to see our universities step up. In New Haven, Connecticut, for example, Yale has sponsors like 4 or 5 elementary schools. Well, we've got Penn sponsoring one, Sadie Alexander. Penn could sponsor another, Drexel could sponsor 2.
Temple
could sponsor 2, St. Joe's could sponsor 2,
Where's the
Philadelphia
business community, like the banks and some of these affluent corporations?
Well, the Chamber of Commerce had as their sort of policy under their last chairman, sort of getting Philly education on track. I know that there is a lot of talk about that. I'm not aware of sort of anybody putting their money where their mouth is. Yes.
I join him in being completely unaware of any written recommended strategies or programs that indeed show that the Chamber of Commerce is committed to, even if it just meant sponsoring business classes or pre-business classes for young people who want to be entrepreneurs. There really is a role for the business community in a way that I think has not been adequately tapped yet.
Maybe we need a blueprint of step-by-step how we should go about this?
I'm glad you say that, because I've written 2 different policy papers on education. One when I was far more optimistic when the district had a lot of money, and I was suggesting how they would spend the stimulus money in a way that was different than they were spending it. And then one when I became pretty pessimistic about the ability of the district to correct itself, and I suggest a more New Orleans type model. But you can find those papers at greenforphiladelphia.com under education.
Might take you up on that. South the banner. I want to thank both of you for even discussing this. By June 22nd, I hope you have an answer. That,
so do we.
Yeah, but not just the answer for now, but something that sort of takes us into next year also, so we won't be feeling this dilemma again.
And it is
it's
a dilemma.
Inevitable right now. It looks bad.
A more sustainable solution is really what's going to be required. And the fact remains, City Council cannot. We have done it over the last 3 years alone, but we're at a place now that the state really indeed has to do its part.
And what can we do as parents and bystanders? What do you need us to do?
Whether you have a child in the Philadelphia public school system or not, there really is a role for all of us. There is some value in writing your state senator and writing your state representative and sending letters to the governor. It really does take grassroots organizing in a really substantive, strategic way, but I started my political career by participating in those kind of efforts. And it has to be sustainable, to use Councilman Green's terminology, because when you're silent, you get what you get, which is nothing.
That means you also have to vote.
Yes,
first.
That's true. You do have to vote.
It starts there.
I want to thank you for spending as much time as you're spending on this very important issue for our children.
I mean, I went to a good school, so I'd like to see others have the same advantage. Thank you, Min. Thank you, Councilwoman.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Reynolds Brown and Councilman Bill Green. Thank you for being in our audience.